In 2008, Brian Chesky had $60 in his bank account, no investors, and a website that almost no one was using. He was weeks from shutting down, so he did something so strange, so desperate, that his co-founders thought he had lost his mind. He started selling boxes of breakfast cereal. And that decision, that absurd, non-scalable, ridiculous decision, is exactly why Airbnb is worth $100 billion today. Chapter 1. The 90%. Here's a number that should terrify every founder. 90% of startups fail. Not because they run out of ideas, not because the market doesn't want what they're building. They fail because they make one specific, avoidable mistake, and they make it at exactly the wrong time. This video is about that mistake. It's about the counterintuitive discipline that the world's most successful founders share. The discipline that looks like weakness to outsiders, but turns out to be the single greatest competitive advantage in business. We're going to trace this lesson through Airbnb, through Amazon, through Stripe, and we're going to look at what happens when founders ignore this lesson entirely. Because the cautionary tale is just as important as the success story. Chapter 2. Airbnb on the brink. Let's go back to San Francisco, 2008. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia had already been rejected by 7 major venture capital firms. They'd moved into their own apartment to save money. They were maxing out credit cards. The website, Air Bed and Breakfast, had almost no traction. They had a great idea, letting people rent out space in their homes to strangers, but nobody believed in it. Hotels felt safe, strangers felt risky. The concept seemed absurd at best, dangerous at worst. Paul Graham, the legendary founder of Y Combinator, would later admit that when he first heard the pitch, he thought it sounded completely insane. Who would sleep on a stranger's air mattress? And yet the founders kept pushing, not by building more features, not by pivoting to something easier, but by doing something most founders refuse to do. They went and talked to their actual users in person, and they did things that would never ever scale. Chapter 3. The Cereal Box Gambit. The Democratic National Convention was coming to Denver in 2008. Hotels would be sold out across the city. Chesky and Gebbia listed their apartment, took in 3 paying guests, and realized something crucial. The demand was real. People would actually do this, but they still had no money. So they did something extraordinary. They designed 2 custom cereal boxes, Obama O's and Cap'n McCain's. They sold them at $8 a box during the convention. They sold 1,000 boxes, 30 grand in 10 days. It wasn't a serious business model, but it kept the lights on long enough for something else to happen. It got them into Y Combinator, because Paul Graham was so deeply impressed by the founder's raw resourcefulness that he changed his mind. He realized a founder willing to do anything to survive is a founder who will find a way to make the product work. That willingness to be scrappy, creative, and unscalable turned out to be the most important trait in the room. Chapter 4. Do things that don't scale. Paul Graham eventually turned this observation into one of the most influential essays in startup history. He called it, Do Things That Don't Scale. The core insight is deceptively simple. Early-stage startups almost never fail because they did something too small. They fail because they tried to automate, systemize, and scale before they truly understood what their users actually needed. Graham told the Airbnb founders to go to New York, their biggest market, and knock on doors, meet their hosts personally, take professional photos of the listings, make every single interaction feel like it was built just for that one user. It was exhausting, it was expensive per user, and it was completely unsustainable at any real scale. But here's what happened. In the weeks after that New York trip, Airbnb's revenue doubled, not because they built a new feature, not because they ran ads, because they found out through painful, personal, non-scalable effort exactly what was stopping people from booking. The photos were bad, hosts were uncertain, trust was the product, and once they knew that, really knew it, they could build scalable systems to solve it. Chapter 5. The WeWork Warning. Now let's look at what happens when founders ignore this lesson. WeWork raised over $10 billion before going public. Their pitch was simple: shared office spaces for startups. The vision was radical, the growth was extraordinary, but at the core of the company, something was deeply broken, and no one found out until it was almost too late. The founder, Adam Newman, scaled aggressively before truly understanding the unit economics of the business. WeWork opened location after location, spending enormous money to acquire users, without deeply understanding what those users actually valued or whether the model could ever be profitable at scale. When the IPO prospectus was released in 2019, investors looked at the numbers and were shocked. The company was losing $2,200 for every $1,000 of revenue. It had scaled massively before solving the fundamental problem of whether the business could ever make money. The valuation went from $47 billion to less than $8 billion in a matter of weeks, and the company that had been held up as one of the great startup success stories of the decade had to be bailed out to survive it all. The contrast with Airbnb could not be more stark. They knocked on doors, they met hosts one at a time, they earned trust before they automated it. WeWork scaled fast, spent big, and never developed the depth of understanding that would have caught the fatal flaws before they became catastrophic. Chapter 6: The 100 Users Rule. Paul Graham has a rule for early-stage founders that sounds obvious but almost no one follows it. He says, don't try to get 1 million users. Get 100 users who love you so much they would be genuinely disappointed if you disappeared tomorrow. Because 100 people who love you is a business. 1 million people who think you're okay is not. The difference between those two outcomes comes down to a single discipline: the willingness to go narrow and deep before going wide. Stripe, the payment company now worth $95 billion, launched by manually onboarding every single one of their first 100 customers. Patrick Collison would literally set up Stripe on a customer's laptop, in person, and then debug any issues the same day. One customer at a time, completely unscalable. But those first 100 customers understood the product better than anyone. They became advocates, they spread it themselves, and that depth, that foundation, is what allowed Stripe to eventually serve millions of businesses worldwide. The lesson: the founders who build empires are not the ones who scale fastest. They are the ones who resist the temptation to scale too early, who stay close to the problem, close to the customer, and close to the reality of what is actually working. They do the unscalable thing, not because they don't know how to scale, but because they know something more important. You cannot shortcut the process of learning. The cereal boxes weren't a business plan. They were a signal, a sign of a founder willing to do whatever it takes to stay alive long enough to figure things out. And that, more than any strategy or technology or funding round, is what separates the startups that survive from the ones that don't. If this kind of deep dive into founder thinking is what you're here for, subscribe to Founder Fuel. There are 100 more stories like this one, and we are just getting started.